This week at Starbase, there was a lot of action revolving around test articles, with 3 present at the Massey Outpost, 2 of them being put through cryo testing and 1 of them failing. So what does this failure mean for the Block 3 ships and boosters? And is it any indication that something might be fundamentally wrong with the design? Well, let's dig into this week's update and find out. To start things off, over at the build site, crews moved ahead and installed the aft flaps on Starship 39, completing assembly of the ship's structure and bringing it one step closer to its own pre-flight test campaign. The Starlink loading box, nicknamed the PEZ loader, used to hold Starlink satellites before loading them onto the Starship, was moved out of Star Factory and taken to Sanchez. A 4-barrel ring section, likely used to help qualify the bay's welding robots, was taken off the right side workstation in Mega Bay 2 and scrapped. Construction work at the air separation unit plant wrapped up in a big way this week. Underground plumbing and conduit continued to be installed throughout the week, while the heavy equipment began to roll in. A new LR-1500 crane that was delivered and assembled this week joined the ongoing configuration and assembly work on the large SpaceX crane. Crews also completed reassembly and reeving of the crane and were almost ready to put it to work by Sunday evening. Most of the focus for the next 2 days, though, was in bringing the 150-ton capacity LR-1500 crane into service, with multiple imminent tandem lifts to perform. The 1,000-ton SpaceX-owned crane was given further checkouts ahead of the installation of a ballast tray. Heavy lift rigging soon arrived at the ASU plant site, and that was followed by the first of the 2 heavy tandem lift loads. Once the ballast tray was ready, it was quickly installed and the cranes immediately set to work righting the plant equipment and putting it in place. The process was repeated again for the second of the 2 units amid the wind and rain. With the 2 keg-like tanks in place now, workers made ready for the arrival of more plant hardware. 2 major subassemblies rolled in overnight, consisting of control valves and plumbing loops on pre-assembled steel structures. The first of the hardware sleds was lifted into the ASU site and put in place, but the second would lag behind a bit, being set down to the side and unhooked from the crane for future installation. And 1 day later, amidst the low morning fog, the second ASU sled was reconnected and lifted into place. With demolition of Pad 1's footings and foundations now complete, piling work is currently underway to shore up the soft and loamy soil for Pad 1's new flame trench and launch table. More forms were also put in for the protective blast wall between Pad 2 and Highway 4, shielding it from Super Heavy's launch exhaust. While groundwork was underway, workers began cutting out some of the old plumbing lines from Tower 1 to upgrade them for Starship Block 3. Another 2 storage tanks arrived at the port of Brownsville this week, and the tanks were soon brought over to the launch complex for installation. A trio of valve sleds also joined in to help manage the fluid flows across the site's network of pipes and storage tanks, while additional plumbing continues to arrive. The booster cryo testing stand was also moved out from Massey's on Sunday night and sent back to Sanchez to wait until the site's ready to receive Booster 19. Now, after Booster 18's destruction and the loss of a great deal of time, SpaceX does need to make sure that everything goes well. Structural testing isn't the most glamorous work in the launch business, but it's critical to make sure projects of this scale and magnitude are a success, and we've seen a fair amount of testing this week. Test Tank B18.3 was subjected to a cryogenic load test, one which came to an abrupt end when the test article buckled below the common dome. Failure in this area could still be a positive test for SpaceX, since this unpressurized section of the test tank isn't directly related to the same area on a Super Heavy, where the pressurized liquid oxygen tank would be below the common dome. Test Tank S39.1 was also put through another battery of cryogenic load tests this week, successfully completing its 5th and 6th tests overall, as the wider effort to validate Block 3 ships and booster structures continues. Testing abilities are still being added at the Massey Outpost, with the truss structure being built up at the ship testing flame trench. The attempt to install the next frame section was abandoned on Sunday, with the second attempt made the next day. This second go-around, the work was a success, and workers moved on to install its mirror piece on the other side the next day. A significant amount of time was needed to anchor and secure this second piece to the rest of the truss. The third test tank at Massey's was the next to receive some attention. its round of load testing complete, a crane began removing actuators from the top of the can crusher above test tank B18.1. By Thursday, workers began disassembling the test setup on test tank B18.3, lifting out the tension rods around the buckled tank. Switching over to Florida, this week we saw the launch of 2 Falcon 9 rockets, each carrying a batch of Starlink satellites. Group 6-100 lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 on Sunday, carrying 29 satellites into orbit. On Wednesday, Starlink Group 17-30 followed out of Vandenberg, carrying 25 satellites, one more than previous Starlink launches we've seen that went into sun-synchronous orbit. In other space news this week, the Artemis II Space Launch System departed the Vehicle Assembly Building and made its journey to LC-39B last Saturday, moving at a blistering top speed of 1 mile per hour. Several crew access arm tests were performed after its arrival at the pad as part of the pre-flight system's checkout. NASA are still targeting February 6 for the launch of Artemis II, pending a successful wet dress rehearsal. NASA also announced that Artemis II will fly fabric from the Wright Flyer and 2 famous U.S. flags. The swatch of fabric previously flew on STS-51D in 1985 and will be joined by the flag that flew on STS-1 and STS-135, the first and last shuttle missions, and was returned from the ISS on the SpaceX Demo 2 mission. The second flag was originally slated to fly to the moon on the canceled Apollo 18 mission, and now, over 50 years later, it will finally get its chance with the first crewed Artemis flight. ESAR Aerospace completed its final integration and testing ahead of the second launch of their Spectrum rocket, which has been delayed due to a pressure valve issue. RocketLab's Neutron rocket fairing arrived at the Port of Baltimore, where it was loaded on a barge to be shipped down to their Wallops facility for integration with the rest of the vehicle. Per the shipping manifest, the fairing weighs approximately 18,800 kilograms. The secondary cargo manifest showed a test rig and a load spreader. Now I want to give a special thanks to our new friends at Streamtime Live, who generously let us use their stream footage for this update. So make sure you go subscribe to their YouTube channel and give them a like. United Launch Alliance announced that their second Vulcan mobile launcher is in its second phase of testing ahead of the first 6 booster Vulcan launch and first Vulcan flight from Amazon Leo. Vast Space has begun the first phase of cleanroom integration for Haven 1, with the space station now scheduled to launch no earlier than the first quarter of 2027. Blue Origin's first Blue Moon lander, named after Ernest Shackleton's famous Antarctic expedition ship, the Endurance, left Cape Canaveral and headed to port to be shipped to Houston, Texas for thermal vacuum testing at NASA's Johnson Space Center ahead of its upcoming launch later this year. After 3 missions to the International Space Station and 27 years at NASA, Suni Williams has retired from the space agency effective December 27, 2025. She does so as an extremely accomplished astronaut, being part of a select few to fly on 4 different spacecraft, including the crewed flight test of Boeing's Starliner, and holding the title of the second most spacewalks by a woman in history. The European Space Agency shared test footage of the descent module's landing legs for ExoMars, an upcoming astrobiology mission bound for the Red Planet. Blue Origin announced the introduction of TerraWave, a business and government-oriented service offering ultra-high bandwidth data links from space to Earth's surface. The constellation will consist of over 5,400 satellites in Earth's orbit, offering download speeds of up to 6 terabits per second using optical links. Failing during hardware testing is always better than failing just before or during a flight, but it doesn't make it hurt less when a stage fails during structural testing, as Neutron's Stage 1 tank did during a hydrostatic test this week. Analyzing and remedying the deficiencies that led to the tank's failure may take some time, and the rework will likely cause several weeks or possibly months of delay for the Neutron program. In better news for RocketLab, Electron successfully completed its first mission of 2026, carrying 2 satellites for their new launch customer, OpenCosmos. Now, this mission had the longest course correction and circularization burn to date for the Curie kick stage, delivering the satellites into a 1,050-kilometer circular orbit. Rocket Factory Augsburg announced the booking of 2 more flights from the European Space Agency amid ongoing efforts to grow domestic launch capabilities and strategic independence. Blue Origin's final announcement this week was the inclusion of AST SpaceMobile Block 2 Bluebird satellites as rideshare payloads on NG-3. This will also be the first reflight of New Glenn, reusing the booster Never Tell Me the Odds, which flew and successfully landed on NG-2. Stoke Space shared a test video of their Nova rocket's flight termination system, making an impressive bang and verifying that the system is capable of destroying the rocket if it fails in flight. The great Greg Scott took to the Florida skies once again this week, bringing us an up-to-date aerial view of the Space Coast. Starting off at NASA's Launch Complex 39B, the integrated SLS stack and Orion capsule for the Artemis II mission is now at the pad and awaiting pre-launch testing. Nearby, while SpaceX's Launch Complex 39A may not have seen a launch in over a month, the site is seeing steady work on its Starship infrastructure as SpaceX continues building out the new tank farm between the 2 pads. Nearby, we can see the ship quick disconnect arm is now installed on the Starship tower, and below, the chopsticks have scaffolding near their ends. This is likely in preparation of installation of the short extensions we recently saw installed at Starbase. A little further down the coast, Space Launch Complex 40 has already been host to 5 Falcon 9 launches this year and is scheduled to see 4 more in the next 2 weeks before a short break to prepare for the Crew 12 launch. On the far side of the pad, we can see the landing zone being built there looking fairly complete. Perhaps the Crew 12 mission will feature this site's first landing. At Launch Complex 37, virtually the entire site has been raised in preparation for the build-out of the new Starship infrastructure. The massive LR-13000 crawler crane that installed the launch mount at 39A has been relocated to this site in preparation for eventually stacking the tower being assembled at Roberts Road. Roberts Road continues to see steady Starship-related work while still being the hub for SpaceX's East Coast Falcon 9 operations. On the north side of the site, construction on the Florida Gigabay continues to see steady progress, with the 4 tower cranes raising the steel level by level. Looking at the walkways, we can see that crews will have easy access to almost the entirety of each of the 24 vehicles that can be worked on in this massive facility at once. On the south side of the site, the first tower for Space Launch Complex 37 is really coming together. All 9 of the tower's modules are now structurally complete, and crews have turned their focus to the rest of the fit-out. Emergency stairs have been added to the first 7 sections, and pipework is also visible on the first few. Nearby, work continues on the chopsticks and carriage for this new tower. In the tent, next to the chopsticks, we can see the extension for the ship quick disconnect arm at Launch Complex 39A being worked on in preparation for its installation in the near future. Meanwhile, just a few miles to the south, Blue Origin is working to expand their Space Coast rocket factory. At the far southern edge of their south campus, ground clearing and grading work continues in preparation for the next wave of construction, which includes a massive building of almost 1 million square feet. And just to the north, we can see the ongoing work for the current phase of expansion. The new chemical processing facility looks to be still undergoing interior fit-outs, while a concrete apron is being poured on the far side of the building. In the parking lot out front, we can see a large bridge crane awaiting installation. The light industrial and metal fabrication buildings are likewise undergoing internal fit-outs, with the construction crews working out of the lot between them. The Lunar Plant 1 facility, home to the company's Blue Moon Mark II lander, is now operational, and we can see a few ring structures staged in the parking lot, as well as several wooden crates of similar size. Over at the second stage cleaning and testing facility, we can see the framework for a new door has been installed, finally replacing the door that was blown off the building in 2024 when a New Glenn second stage failed during testing. Over near the coast at the company's Launch Complex 36, Blue Origin is preparing for the 3rd launch of their New Glenn rocket. With the door open, we can just make out some hardware in the shadows. Could this be the booster Never Tell Me the Odds preparing for its 2nd flight? Well, let us know what you think in the comments below. And at the far north end of the facility, we can see piling work underway in preparation for some new construction in that area. We were treated to a nice view of Stoke Space's Launch Complex 14, where the company is hoping to launch their Nova rocket later this year. And last but definitely not least this week, Relativity Space continues to build out the infrastructure at Launch Complex 16, making steady progress as they work towards the inaugural launch of their Terran R rocket. And there you have it, another jam-packed and Avid space update brought to you by our stellar team working day and night to bring you all the news in spaceflight. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.